She was left alone in a hospital bed, too weak to move, while the people she called family vanished without a second thought. But what they didn't know, what no one could have guessed, was that the man they buried had left behind a secret so powerful it would expose every lie, every betrayal, and change her life forever. This is the story of the widow they abandoned, and the inheritance that would turn everything upside down. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Clara Mitchell was never the type of woman who demanded attention. She moved through life quietly, content in the small rhythms of everyday living. She met Daniel Mitchell at a community fundraiser in their mid-30s, and what began as polite conversation over coffee turned into something deeper than either of them expected. Daniel was a soft-spoken man, the kind who listened more than he spoke, who noticed when you were upset before you said a word. He worked as an accountant at a mid-sized firm downtown, kept his hair neatly combed, wore the same watch his father gave him, and never once raised his voice in anger. Clara loved him not for grand gestures, but for the way he remembered how she took her tea, the way he held her hand during thunderstorms, the way he looked at her like she was the only person in the room. They married quietly in a courthouse ceremony with 2 witnesses and a bouquet of daisies. No big wedding, no fanfare, just 2 people choosing each other. They bought a small 2-bedroom house on the edge of town, painted the walls themselves, planted tomatoes in the backyard, and spent evenings on the porch talking about nothing and everything. Life was simple, life was enough. But Daniel's family never saw it that way. To them, Clara was an outsider, someone who didn't come from the right background, didn't have the right education, didn't fit the image they had for Daniel's future. His mother, Margaret, was especially cold, offering tight-lipped smiles at family gatherings and speaking to Sarah only when necessary. His brother, Andrew, barely acknowledged her existence, and his sister, Lisa, made passive comments about how Daniel could have done better. Clara felt every slight, every dismissive glance, every conversation that stopped when she entered the room. But Daniel always reassured her. He would hold her close at night and say, "They don't matter. You're the one I chose. You're the one I love." And she believed him. She had to, because loving Daniel meant enduring his family, and she was willing to pay that price. Years passed. They celebrated birthdays, anniversaries, quiet Christmases. They talked about having children, but decided they were happy as they were. Daniel worked long hours, but always came home to her. He was her constant, her calm, her safe place in a world that often felt too harsh. And then, one day, without warning, everything shattered. It happened on a Tuesday morning. Daniel was at work, sitting at his desk reviewing spreadsheets, when he suddenly felt a strange pressure in his chest. He stood up, thinking he needed air, but his legs buckled beneath him. His co-workers shouted his name as he collapsed to the floor, his eyes staring blankly at the fluorescent lights above. By the time the ambulance arrived, he was unresponsive. Clara got the call at 10:47 a.m. She remembers the exact time because she was stirring soup on the stove, and the clock on the wall seemed to freeze the moment the doctor's voice came through the phone. "Mrs. Mitchell, your husband has suffered a major stroke. You need to come to the hospital immediately." She didn't remember the drive, didn't remember parking, didn't remember running through the sliding doors or the nurse guiding her to the ICU. All she remembered was seeing Daniel on that bed, tubes running from his arms, machines beeping steadily, his face pale and still. She held his hand and whispered his name over and over, but he didn't wake up. The doctors said there was nothing more they could do. The damage was too severe. They asked if she wanted to say goodbye. She stayed with him for hours, stroking his hair, telling him she loved him, begging him not to leave her. But at 6:32 p.m., Daniel Mitchell's heart stopped beating. and Clara's world went silent. His family arrived an hour after he died. Margaret walked in with dry eyes and a stiff posture, glanced at Daniel's body, then turned to Clara and asked, "Where are his papers?" Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "Are you okay?" Just, "Where are his papers?" Andrew stood by the door, arms crossed, already on his phone. Lisa sat in the corner, flipping through a magazine. They didn't cry. They didn't grieve. They waited. And when the funeral was over, when Daniel was buried in a simple plot under an oak tree, they scattered like leaves in the wind. Clara was left alone in the house that still smelled like him, surrounded by his clothes, his books, his coffee mug still sitting on the kitchen counter. She couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't breathe without feeling like the air was too heavy. Grief wrapped around her like a fog, thick and suffocating, and she wandered through each day like a ghost in her own life. 2 months passed, and then Clara got sick. At first she thought it was just exhaustion. Grief does strange things to the body. But then came the dizziness, the nausea, the sharp pains in her chest that made her gasp for air. She collapsed in the kitchen one morning, her vision swimming, her hands shaking so badly she couldn't hold the phone to call for help. A neighbor found her and called an ambulance. The doctors ran tests and told her she was severely dehydrated, malnourished, and her blood pressure was dangerously low. They said she needed rest, monitoring, and someone to take care of her. Clara called Margaret. No answer. She called Andrew. Voicemail. She called Lisa. The phone rang twice, then went silent. She left messages, sent texts, waited. No one came. Days passed in that sterile hospital room. Nurses checked on her with kind eyes and soft voices, but they couldn't hide the pity. "Is anyone coming to see you today, Mrs. Mitchell?" a young nurse asked gently. Clara just shook her head. She stopped calling after the first week, stopped hoping after the second. The family that had barely tolerated her when Daniel was alive had completely erased her now that he was gone. She was invisible, disposable, forgotten. And lying in that cold bed, too weak to stand, too heartbroken to cry, Clara felt something break inside her that she didn't know could break. It wasn't just sadness. It was the crushing weight of realizing that the people who were supposed to care didn't. That love, loyalty, family, they were just words. And words meant nothing when tested. But then, on the 10th night, something happened. A nurse Clara had never seen before entered her room holding a small brown envelope. The nurse was older, with silver streaks in her hair and a careful way of moving, like someone who had seen too much and learned to carry it quietly. She approached Sarah's bedside and spoke in a low, steady voice. "Mrs. Mitchell, this was left in your husband's file. The instructions were very specific. It was to be given to you only if your health ever declined severely. I think he wanted you to have it now." Clara's hands trembled as she took the envelope. It was sealed, unmarked except for her name written in Daniel's handwriting. She tore it open with shaking fingers. Inside was a single piece of paper. Just one sentence. But it stopped her heart. "Clara, trust only what I left unseen." Clara stared at the note for what felt like hours. Trust only what I left unseen. What did that mean? Unseen where? Why would Daniel leave her a message like this? Why now? Her mind raced, replaying every conversation they'd ever had, every quiet moment, every time he'd smiled at her like he knew something she didn't. Daniel had always been deliberate. He didn't do things without reason. If he left her this message, it meant something. It meant there was more. Clara's health slowly improved, not because of medicine, but because of purpose. She forced herself to eat, to walk, to rebuild her strength, because she needed to go home. She needed to find whatever Daniel had left behind. The day she was discharged, she stood in the doorway of their house and felt the weight of his absence all over again. But this time, she wasn't drowning in it. She was searching through it. She started in the bedroom, going through his closet, his drawers, the pockets of jackets he'd never wear again. Nothing. She moved to the garage, sifting through boxes of old tax returns, receipts, tools. Nothing. She checked the attic, the basement, behind picture frames, under the mattress. Nothing. Hours turned into days. And just when she was about to give up, she found it. In Daniel's old office, tucked in the back corner of the house, was a wooden desk he used late at night. Clara had always respected his space, never touched his things. But now, she pulled open every drawer, checked every corner. And there, taped beneath the bottom drawer, was a small brass key. Old, heavy, with Daniel's initials faintly engraved on the side. Her breath caught. Beside the key was another envelope. Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside, another message. When they show you who they are, the truth will show you what is yours. Below that, an address, a lawyer's name, and a date, the same week Daniel had died. Clara sat on the floor, clutching the note to her chest, tears streaming down her face. Daniel had known. He had known what would happen. He had prepared for this. The next morning, Clara drove to the address on the note. It led her to a small law office on the edge of town, the kind of place you'd walk past without noticing. The lawyer, an older man named Mr. Harrison, greeted her with gentle eyes and a sad smile. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said quietly, "I've been waiting for you." He led her to a private room and placed a metal lockbox on the table between them. The lock matched the brass key perfectly. Clara's hands trembled as she turned the key and opened the box. Inside were documents, stacks of them. Property deeds, investment statements, account numbers, land titles, rental agreements. Her eyes scanned the pages, her heart pounding louder with each line. Daniel owned properties in 3 different states, a cabin in the mountains, 2 apartment buildings generating rental income, a piece of land his father had left him that he'd never mentioned, and a bank account with a balance that made Clara's vision blur. She looked up at Mr. Harrison, unable to speak. He nodded slowly. "Your husband was a very private man, Mrs. Mitchell. He lived modestly by choice, not necessity. He wanted to protect you. He knew that if his family ever found out about his wealth, they would take everything. So he hid it, and he made sure that if anything happened to him, and if you were ever left alone, everything would go to you. Only you." Clara's tears fell silently onto the papers. Daniel had loved her so deeply that he had built a safety net she never knew existed. He had anticipated betrayal. He had seen his family's true nature, and he had made sure she would never be left without protection. Mr. Harrison handed her one final letter. "He wanted you to read this when you were ready." Clara unfolded the letter with shaking hands. It was written in Daniel's careful handwriting, and every word felt like his voice speaking directly to her soul. "My dearest Clara, if you are reading this, it means I am gone, and it means my family has shown you who they truly are. I am so sorry you had to see it. I am sorry I could not protect you from their cruelty. But I want you to know this. You were the best part of my life. You were my peace, my joy, my reason. I hid this wealth not because I didn't trust you, but because I wanted to shield you. I knew that if they saw what I had, they would destroy you the way they tried to destroy everything good in my life. So I waited. I prepared. And now, everything I built, everything I saved, belongs to you. Live freely, Clara. Live fully. And know that my love for you was the truest thing I ever knew. Forever yours, Daniel. Within weeks, Clara's health returned, not just physically, but emotionally. For the first time since Daniel's death, she felt like she could breathe. She didn't flaunt the inheritance. She didn't change her life dramatically. She stayed in the same house, kept the same routines, lived quietly. But word spread. Small towns have a way of making secrets public. And when Daniel's family heard whispers of an inheritance, they came running. Margaret showed up first, knocking on Clara's door with a forced smile and a basket of muffins. "Clara, darling, I've been so worried about you. I should have visited sooner. I'm so sorry." Clara looked at her calmly. "You knew where I was?" Margaret's smile faltered. "Well, things have been so busy. You understand. But I'm here now, and I wanted to talk to you about Daniel's estate. Surely there are things that should stay in the family." Clara didn't raise her voice, didn't get angry. She simply said, "Everything Daniel wanted me to have, I have, and everything he wanted his family to have, he gave." Margaret's face hardened. "That's not fair. He was our son." "And I was his wife." Andrew and Lisa came next, threatening lawyers, demanding documents, accusing Clara of manipulation. But the will was ironclad. The documents were signed and sealed long before Daniel's death. The lawyer stood as witness. There was nothing they could do. And in that moment, they realized what they had lost. Not money, not property, but the last connection to a man who had loved them despite everything. And they had thrown it away. Clara never spoke to them again, not out of bitterness, but out of peace. She had learned that some people only show love when there's something to gain. And she refused to let them take any more of her life. She started a small scholarship fund in Daniel's name, helped young people who came from nothing, just like she had, visited his grave every Sunday with fresh flowers, and lived the rest of her days with quiet dignity, knowing she had been loved by a man who saw her worth when no one else did. So I ask you, if you were in Clara's position, how would you have handled it? Would you have forgiven the family that abandoned you? Would you have shared the inheritance? Or would you have walked away and built a new life, just like Clara did? Let me know in the comments. I really want to hear your thoughts. And if this story touched you, if it made you think about the people in your own life, about who truly shows up when things fall apart, then stay with us. Because next time, we're diving into another true story, one that will challenge everything you think you know about loyalty, family, and justice. Until then, remember what Daniel taught us, that love isn't loud. It's not in the words people say. It's in what they do when no one's watching. And sometimes, the people who love you most are the ones preparing for your protection long before you ever need it. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next story.